I am a United States sailor. I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States of America, and I will obey the orders of those appointed over me. I represent the fighting spirit of the Navy and those who have gone before me to defend freedom and democracy around the world. I proudly serve my country's Navy combat team with honor, courage, and commitment. I am committed to excellence and the fair treatment of all. And that is the Sailor's Creed, memorized and spoken by every sailor who serves in the United States Navy.
That's right.
And I've got 3 veterans of the United States Naval Service sitting with me today. First of all, we got Grandpa, a.k.a. Lenny. So from henceforth, I'll call him Lenny. We've got Uncle Doug. From henceforth, I'll call him Doug. And then we got Dad. And from here on out, I'll call him Harry. Actually, I'll call him Mike. And these 3 men in front of me, a father and his sons, served in the United States Navy, served our country so that we could be free, have liberty, and the things that we enjoy today. So we're going to get into their stories a little bit of naval service, hear some sea stories. And with that, thank you guys for coming. This is episode 60, Pack Talk Podcast. And Grandpa, Lenny, we'll start off with you. Can you tell us a little bit about why did you end up joining the Navy?
Well, it was 1942. World War II was going on. I had graduated high school. I worked in a dental laboratory, and I knew that the draft was in effect, and I was classified as A1. I didn't want to go into the Army. I wanted to go to the Navy, but I inquired of all the armed services if I could get a rating for my craft. I was a dental technician. I made false teeth. I worked in a dental lab. And finally, the Navy gave me a rating of hospital apprentice dental second class. And then from there, I went to boot camp.
So that was all at the recruiter office? The recruiter set all that up with you?
Pardon?
The recruiter set all of that up with you?
Oh, yeah.
Your rating and everything, and then they shipped you off to boot camp.
Then they sent me off to boot camp.
And where'd you go for boot camp?
Great Lakes.
Great Lakes? What was that like? Because you grew up, where were you at before boot camp? Where were you growing up at and living at before
Well, I
boot
was
camp?
living with my parents in Springfield, Illinois. And then ended up going to Great Lakes and going through my boot camp there. And after boot camp, they kept me at Great Lakes as part of the base. And I was there for 2 years.
So after boot camp, they kept you there as base...
Ship's company.
Ship's company for the base.
Yeah.
And what were you doing at that?
Working in a dental lab.
Making some teeth?
Making false teeth.
Pulling any teeth?
No, I didn't. No, I worked in a dental laboratory. But it was good duty. We had liberty every night.
Nice.
Every weekend. And I put in several requests for sea duty. Every time I put in a request, they sent me to another school on the base. And after 2 years, I got my orders to ship out.
And where were the orders to?
Went to Treasure Island, California.
Nice.
And I was there like 3 days, and I was assigned to an APA, which is a troop ship. We went to Port Chicago, California, and picked up a Marine regiment to go to Pearl Harbor. And there's 3 days we spent there loading the boat, and then we zigzagged 5 days across the Pacific Ocean to Pearl Harbor. Marines got off, and I was sent to Pearl Harbor, or not Pearl Harbor, but Pearl City, and I was assigned to a CB unit, which is a group of they're all craftsmen,
Yeah.
various crafts. And I wasn't there too long. And let's see, where did I go from there? Oh, I went to a air base on Maui, island of Maui in Hawaii. And this was a training area for what we called 90-day wonders. college graduates that just became pilots, and some of them got very careless, crashed into each other. The aircraft burned, and I'll never forget the smell of burning flesh.
And what was your at that time when you were stationed there? What was your main?
Well, I
job?
was just stationed at the dispensary there, sick bay.
Okay.
And that was it. There was no dental work involved. And I drove the ambulance when needed.
So when these guys would crash into each other, that's when you would go pick them up.
Right. Yeah, and that was a bad scene. Anyhow, as the war came to an end in 1945, I think, I was transferred back to, where did I go? I think I went back to Pearl Harbor, and I was assigned to a patrol boat, PC 1077, and I was a first class pharmacist mate at the time, and I was fifth ranking man on board ship, and all we did was go back and forth between Pearl Harbor and Diamond Head. We'd be out like 5 days and be in 2 days, and go back out again, back and forth. And then as the war closed, they came up with a system of points for discharge. And I had enough points to get out, and I was hesitant about getting out. But then when I had my total points, I said, I'm going to get out. But they offered me a position of chief, increase in pay, and I gave it some thought, but then I said, no, I'm going home. And that was my Navy career.
Well, backing it up a little bit, that's a lot in a short amount of time, right? A lot of stuff going on, especially back in World War II.
Yeah.
Which for the listener, Lenny is 99, right?
Right.
So back in World War II, things are crazy, obviously.
Yeah.
And you're right out there at the front line, essentially, the last United States state/territory in the Pacific, which is out. The Hawaii is out there in the middle of the Pacific. If you've never been there, if you're the listener, maybe look on a map. It's literally in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. And so you mentioned whenever you were going to Hawaii from California with the Marine Regiment, that your ship was doing zigzags.
Yeah.
Why was your ship doing that?
Well, there were possibilities of Japanese subs. And we had a couple of general quarters. I guess it was just testing, but nothing ever happened. But it's an experience.
Yeah. And so for the listener, general quarters, if you're not a Navy veteran, that means everyone to your battle stations.
Yes.
Right? So you could be sleeping. It's the middle of the night. And then all of a sudden they sound the alarm, go to general quarters. So you have to hustle to your battle station.
Right.
Right? And you might be there for several hours waiting. Is anything happening? What's going on? Then, all right, stand down.
Right.
So then you go back to your normal routine.
Right.
While you're underway with a bunch of Marines on board. Right?
Right.
And Marines are just causing trouble on board. They're walking down the hallway on the ship. They're turning random knobs, right? So they're shutting off your shower water. They're shutting off the water that flushes your toilets. The reason I know that is because I've served with submarines on a ship as well. So that's my experience, at least. Is that how it was back in the day? All right. And then you mentioned the patrol craft, the patrol boat, right? What was the main mission of that whenever you're patrolling off the island?
Patrolling between Pearl Harbor and Diamond Head, which is the Diamond Head, I think, is a volcano, inactive volcano, and they never had any problems. They were just calm as it could be, back and forth 5 days a week.
You looking for submarines or air
watching for subs, patrolling the harbor.
Yeah, I don't know if patrol craft are in service that much anymore.
No,
I know they have been.
Did you stand watch on the patrol boat?
No, I didn't have to do that.
You were primarily the corpsman?
Yeah.
Or
yeah. Well, as a craftsman going into the service, I was a part of a what I call rated company. These were all craftsmen of different types. They're butchers, bakers, cabinet makers, carpenters, electricians. And I guess you might say we were special. Because we didn't have to learn manual of arms. We didn't have to get up at 5 o'clock and do physical training.
Mm.
And maybe we were what you would call the elite. And it was good duty.
Yeah. You had your own organization within the organization.
Right.
Correct? Well, yeah. What are some of the most, whenever you're thinking back on your times in service, what are some of you already mentioned the smell of flesh, right? Obviously not that good of a memory. But do you have any sea stories or memories that you reflect upon of your time in service from any of your duty stations?
Well, I didn't have that many duty stations, and I never saw much action at all. In fact, I didn't see any action.
Yeah.
I was very fortunate. I was blessed that I didn't have to experience warfare.
Yeah.
And I didn't, it was a very quiet life for me.
It's good. You don't have to see action to have sea stories, though.
No,
That's
not
true.
too many. I didn't have too many experiences.
Anything you and your shipmates, would play tricks on each other, or maybe you remember?
No, we never did that.
No tricks.
We had there was a select group of the guys that I worked with in the dental laboratory. We went weekends. We went to Milwaukee. We went to Chicago, and that was it. We had Liberty every night, Liberty every weekend. And maybe I shouldn't say this, but while I was in boot camp, or no, was it boot camp? No, it wasn't boot camp. It was after I graduated from boot camp. Mm-hmm. My barracks was near Highway 41, which ran from Chicago north. And a lot of truckers traveled this highway. So I could walk out to the highway, grab a truck, and go to Springfield to visit my parents.
There you go.
No authorization to go, but I went. And I came back on the train, and the shore patrol was patrolling the train. They never stopped to see me. I'd have been in big trouble.
You just blended right in. Good to go. Blended in and out. Good to go. What happened after the Navy? So once you got out.
After the Navy, I went back home to my parents. And my dad was working in a very high-class men's store. And one of his clients was a partner in a motion picture theater circuit. My dad told him I was looking for a job. He hired me. And I was in show business. I had 2 drive-in theaters. I had 5 indoor theaters. And that's what I did until I met my wife.
So while you're at the theaters, I can only imagine the amount of leadership that you had to utilize to manage many facets of operations going on.
Well, I knew every phase of the operation. Let's see what happened. We'd have manager meetings in various cities within the state. And I always got the Mr. Clean award for having the cleanest theaters.
Very nice.
Maybe learned that in the Navy.
Maybe you did. Was that from the Navy? You learned that operational compliance in the Navy?
Yeah. It was good duty. I was happy, but I wanted to get out.
Yeah.
So what else do you need to know?
Did you have a question? No. I was just wondering if you had any leadership lessons learned from the theater business. What were some of your major takeaways for helping to manage all that?
Well, I don't know. I guess from the discipline that I learned in the Navy, I guess I applied it to my employees. And they always wanted to whenever they would leave to go to college or whatever, They'd always want to come back to work for me. Well, I didn't have a position for them. But I had good employees, and they were good to me, and I was good to them.
Did you ever send them home with a bag of popcorn at the end of the night?
I'm sorry?
You ever send them home with a bag of popcorn at the end of the night?
No, they got free drinks.
There you go. All right, good to go. Uncle Doug. Doug,
How are you?
how's it going? How'd you end up going into the Navy? Well, growing up with your dad, did you hear about his sea stories at all, or his time in the Navy?
No, actually, he never really talked a whole lot about it, and I know he was in the theater management business, and that's pretty much as much. It was later on, much later on in life, I started asking questions about the Navy. But he was in Quincy, Illinois. I actually was born in Quincy, Illinois, graduated high school, tried the college scene, but college didn't work out for me. So then, okay, what's next? So I joined the Navy. And like my dad, boot camp was in Great Lakes, Illinois. And it was a experience getting there, because from Quincy, they put us on a bus, sent us down to St. Louis. We got sworn in. They gathered a bunch of people, and it was late in the evening, or afternoon, excuse me, when they put us on a train. We're heading to Chicago. We go downtown, change trains, and go way north to Great Lakes. When we get in, I'm going to guess 3:30 in the morning. We get in, and they turn the lights on. There's your bunk, and everybody's complaining, hey, turn the lights out. Because you've been there, you know, there's a lot of folks in this little area for boot camp. Anyway, we get situated, and like 10 minutes later, the lights come back on, and hey, here comes another new recruit, you know, and it goes on until about 4 o'clock. Lights come on, somebody's throwing garbage cans and hollering, and what the, you know, it's like, and the first couple days, it's a little rough, but then you get into the routine, and it's okay after that. And I learned a lot in boot camp, a little bit of, besides how to fold laundry, but, you know, a little bit of discipline, teamwork, you know, and I came out of that, and everybody said it was going to be a horror story. Do what you're told and do it right, and, you know, and you get through, work as a team. And then after that, I got orders to go to Millington, Tennessee, outside of Memphis, and I was going to be an aviation structural mechanic. An AMS, and I don't believe they have that rating any longer. I think they've coordinated or consolidated some together. But I was there 3 months, I'm going to call it. After that, I received orders to Naval Air Station, Lemoore, California, in the middle of the state, just south of Fresno, and was assigned to VA 122, and we worked on A7s. And the mission of the squadron was to pilots would come in. That was the first training for that specific aircraft for the A7. So they were transitioning to the A7, which was attack aircraft back then. It's decommissioned. And I hated being in Lemoore. If you've never been there, there's nothing there. So my first class told me, hey, start volunteering to go on detachments, because they went to Fallon, Nevada to do some bombing runs. They went to Pensacola, Naval Air Station Pensacola, because the USS Lexington, an aircraft carrier, was there for training purposes, and East Coast, West Coast training squadrons to go there for the pilots to do qualify on their aircrafts. And once I went there, and you could go on what they called the beach. You stay on shore, or you go out to the boat, and you take a helicopter out to the boat. And I told them that's what I wanted to do, and I loved it. Loved being in the excitement of the flight deck. Yeah. So when I got back, I put in a request to terminate my shore duty, and it was denied. And I put in, like 2 months later, I put it in again because we had a change of command. When I say that, it was our maintenance officer who had the thumbs up or thumbs down to let you go. It didn't go all the way up to the skipper. He said, yeah, okay. So a few weeks later, I transferred to VA 97. across the street, different hangar. And it just so happened they were preparing to deploy. So I got to do a couple of what they call workups, where they go out. You get used to doing the sea operations, the rhythm that they're in. The pilots are doing their qualifications, and they're doing all kinds of different stuff. And the tempo is pretty high paced. And I loved it. And we'd go between Alameda, which is no longer there, and San Diego, back and forth. And they'd go back to Lemoore, and I wanted to stay there, because I just loved life on the aircraft carrier. And then I think it was like 3 months later, we flew down to San Diego, North Island, Naval Air Station, got on our ship, CVN 70, Carl Vinson, and we took off for the Indian Ocean. And like Dad said, they don't go a straight line. There's a lot of training stuff going on in between point A and point B. And I think it was a month later, we ended up in Pearl Harbor. And I'd never been to Hawaii. Hawaii was cool. I loved Hawaii, and we were there like 48 hours. And boom, we're gone. And from there, we took about a month, and we went to a lot of coordinated training with some of the smaller ships. The crew is taking on, doing some training for replenishment at sea type stuff, and the pilots are just flying the heck out of the aircraft, And
So when you're deployed, you're going with multiple ships, right? It's not just an aircraft carrier.
No. I don't know how many of other aircraft or other ships there are, but there's pictures and you can see them, but there's also submarines that you don't see. So you're there because you're playing some games and you're talking to the pilots and saying, "Oh yeah, he's back there about 20 miles." And, okay, how do you know that? Well, you'd have to be there to know some of that. So I don't know.
Yeah.
And then we ended up in Yokosuka, Japan, I believe it was.
You guys pulled in there for a port visit?
Yeah. I'd never been out of the United States at that time. And
you're loving it.
I didn't speak any Japanese. So, we spent, I think, 3 days there, and we'd go to restaurants, and I couldn't read the menu. I'd point to this, and
they bring you something.
First time I had sushi was over there. So
really?
that was an experience. We went into Tokyo, took a tour there. We went to Mount Fuji, just to the base of it. You couldn't climb it. We didn't have time for that. And then we went to Hong Kong after that, spent a couple days there. That was a very busy port. And then we went to Cubic Point, the Philippines. And there was a big Navy base there. We spent a little bit of time taking on supplies. And after that, we started heading towards the Indian Ocean. And you cross the equator. And for those there's a ceremony for that. You were
transformed.
True. Yeah, I am a shellback now.
Are you allowed to say what happened? What happened?
Well, I don't think the initiation that currently happens was the way it was when I crossed. It was brutal and just pure hazement. I'll call it like that, but because it was all male.
Yeah.
There wasn't mixed at that time. So
real quick for the listener. There is a naval tradition about crossing the equator, right? Because there's Navy ships all over the various oceans and the seas in the world, right? And so the equator is obviously a big deal to go from the northern hemisphere to the southern hemisphere of the globe. And so the Navy has a tradition that goes back to probably whenever Navy started. But basically, if you have not crossed the equator, you're known as a slimy wog. Right? And a wog is something that is just so slimy and nasty, right? You don't even deserve the time of day, right? And then once you cross the equator, you go through, if you're a wog, a slimy wog, you go through an initiation process on your warship. And then once you get through that initiation, if you survive, then you are known as a shellback. And now you have the honor of that title. And there's another tradition where if you cross the equator and the international date line, you can become a golden shellback. And there's some other traditions as well. There's another one for the northern, for the Arctic Circle. What's that?
I've not made that deployment.
It's it's like a blue shellback.
Blue nose. Yeah.
Blue nose. All right.
So anyway, you became a shellback.
Yeah.
You went through the tradition. You went through the process on your warship,
Yes.
and basically all the wogs on the ship, they're going to go through this process, and all the shellbacks are going to help them get rid of their slime and their stench and become a shellback, right?
Yeah.
So you went through that,
Yep.
and then
Yep.
you were a shellback, and everything
Yeah.
was good to go.
Everything's cool now. I can actually make it into the Indian Ocean. They approved me to go. And then after that, which we did, and we made it to the Indian Ocean, and we relieved the duty carrier that was there, which was the USS Enterprise. And we did ops together, some training to go over some stuff. And there was another country, but I can't think of who that country was.
What year was this? You remember?
80, late 83, early 84, somewhere ballpark of
Yeah.
that.
You guys are working with other American warships and foreign country
Yeah,
warships
yeah,
at the same
yeah.
doing training,
Mm-hmm.
right?
And then the Enterprise went back, heading to mainland U.S. Their deployment was coming to an end, and ours was just starting. And aircraft carriers are cool. I loved being on it, and would like to go on an aircraft carrier again sometime, just to see how it is now.
I think they're a lot bigger these days.
Yeah.
They're getting bigger,
Yeah.
right?
And anyway, once you're on station, you don't leave. You don't get to pull into port. You stay at sea. So it was 120 plus days that we just did, training, or Dad said general quarters. You do that a lot, and it is what it is. And we didn't see land for a long, long time.
What was kind of your daily routine at that time when you're actually on station? Basically, your ship is going wherever it needs to go.
Yeah.
Launching aircraft, training, situational awareness, operational awareness, those types of things. What was your daily? Well, like, were you working on the flight deck, or were you
Yeah,
working in the hangar?
I worked on the flight deck.
Yeah.
At the time, I was a third class, working up hard. I wanted to make second really bad. And it was 12 on, 12 off. Didn't matter if it was Monday, whatever, because out
Yeah.
there, it's 7 days a week.
Right.
So I'd get off work, I'd go eat, and I'd go to the gym.
Nice.
And you could stay in the gym for an hour and a half because there's a line to get in.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
So you do your time, you go eat, and you got right back in line. And you worked out again, so you got 2 workouts in.
2 days.
And it's like, okay, what are you going to do?
Yeah.
You'd write a letter here or there because it was snail mail, that's it back then. And you go back into your workspace and you'd start working again. And you're not on duty technically, but hey, you just keep going.
Yeah.
And you get into that routine, and it's at people saying it's $12 a day, 7 days a week. But I mean, once you get into it, it's just nature. You just do it, And I thought it was fun because I've always loved aircraft. I loved being on an aircraft carrier deployed, and excuse me, we did that, and then I got a chance to take the test for second class, and I made it, and that was like
On
thank
deployment?
you. Yeah.
Nice.
So that was one of the best pictures I still have as our skipper promoting me. Getting my second stripe on there. So that was really a big deal for me. And then we started heading back. I can't remember the aircraft carrier that relieved us, and I don't know what it was. But
Real quick, while you were on deployment over in that area of the world, what was the flight deck temperatures like?
It was hot. It was really hot. It was hot.
And you're in all your flight deck gear.
Oh, yeah.
Right? Safety
Yeah.
gear.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Plus you got the jet engines just making it even hotter.
Oh yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Well, and you have F-14s with the afterburners and everything, so it was really hot. And then we started heading back, and as we were starting to come back, the boat skipper came on the boat I forget what the
1MC.
1MC and said, "Hey, there's a Russian bear coming by, and you can't take pictures." He said it'll be escorted by 2 F-14s, and they flew by, and we're just snapping pictures like anything. And I still have those pictures, but that was kind of cool because I'd never seen back then it was a USSR, the Soviet. It wasn't the Russians then, because
that was still in the Cold War technically.
Yeah.
Was that
Yeah.
doing a reconnaissance on you guys? Do you know?
I would
Or
have
it
to
just
say-
happened to be
I
in
don't
the
know.
operator?
I would say so.
Yeah,
You know, but I mean, he was fully escorted by armed
F-14s,
F-14s
yeah. Oh,
until he cleared our space, and then we just continued on. We ended up going to Australia for
Oh,
10
nice.
days after being at sea for a long, long time.
Little post-deployment port visit.
Absolutely. And I had duty one day, and I ended up selling it. So the buddies I was with, we just had hotel rooms, and we didn't have to report back to duty. You know,
Nice.
so
Come back in 10 days.
10 days are up, and you know we go back to Cubic Bay in the Philippines, and we stay there for a couple days, and then we head back to Pearl Harbor. Coming into Pearl Harbor, you pass the USS Arizona Memorial.
Mm-hmm.
And I've been at Hawaii during the workups and didn't think twice. But coming back, I said, okay, now you're on the front lines from a naval perspective.
Mm-hmm.
That really was emotional passing
Yeah.
that, because you man the rail,
Yeah.
and you go you do honors as you pass by. It's a very solemn place at that time, and then we did that, and then we spent a very short time there, and then we pulled into Alameda. To get to Alameda, you go underneath the Golden Gate Bridge. And as you're coming in, there's all kinds of little bitty boats circling you, and you pull underneath the Golden Gate, and people are throwing roses on you, and
Nice.
you just get chills like, oh
Yeah.
my goodness.
You guys
That was-
manning the rails, that
oh, yeah.
whole sea
Yeah,
and
the
anchor detail?
whole thing
Yeah.
coming in. And then we came back, and I think we came back in October-ish, September-ish. And this was 85. No, at 84, because I got out in 84.
Mm-hmm.
And then in December of 84, I chose to get out. And that was my naval time.
Good to go.
Actually
So-
loved it.
So you
Loved
love the aircraft carrier life.
I do.
Most people you talk to, they're not a big fan of being on
Oh,
aircraft
man, I
carriers.
slept like
You
a
love an
baby. I
aircraft
slept
carrier.
like a baby on that thing.
Nowadays, I hear they got Starbucks on those things.
No. Wow.
Like a little outlet on the aircraft.
Wow.
I don't know for sure.
That'd be cool.
That's the rumor, though.
Yeah.
That's the rumor.
That would be super cool. Super cool.
But yeah, so you're on while you were living on the aircraft carrier, because you were technically a detachment, correct? You were embarked on the aircraft carrier.
Mhm.
Your sleeping arrangements. Did you have? Were you hot racking? And for those that aren't familiar with naval terms, a hot rack is one man's on shift, right, on duty for 12 hours. The other man gets the rack, so he's sleeping. Then they come, they swap. They're sharing the same rack, which is a common practice on submarines and smaller vessels, maybe the patrol craft. But was that your experience, or you had your own rack?
Yeah, on our ship, you got your own, and your locker is actually, your bed lifts up,
Under
your
the rack,
mast, and
yeah,
right there. So it was on. You had the curtain, so it was.
Yeah.
I didn't mind that, except
Yeah.
for some of the jerks that set their alarm. Why they set alarm, I have no idea, because they're doing maintenance on the catapults all night long, or
Oh,
when they're
yeah.
not flying.
Yeah.
So it's still loud the entire time. But the sleeping arrangements was they're 3 high, and I luckily got the top one, so I wasn't sandwiched. But
So if you woke up in the middle of the night, you wouldn't smack your head. 'Cause
No,
you,
that's
you had
true.
some overhead, right?
that's true. You have to talk to a bubblehead about hot racks, and maybe we'll learn about that. I don't know, but I'm gonna let you describe what a bubblehead is. But yeah, so that the sleeping arrangements weren't so bad, you
Yeah.
know, and and on board ship, you got to learn how to go the routes, because when you're at general quarters, there's a very specific way you move about the ship. And even when we're not at general quarters, when we had Marine security on board and they say make a hole, they mean make a hole,
Yeah.
because they're coming by and they're going to get you upside the head with their M16 as they're running by.
Yeah.
And they'll do it just out of spite.
Yeah.
Say, I told you to get out of the way, get out of the way. So you learn to hug the bulkhead really
Yeah.
quick.
Well, sometimes, the Marines, I have a lot of friends that are Marines, but sometimes they forget they're actually part of the Navy.
Yes.
Sometimes they forget.
Yeah. Yeah.
So you had Marines on your ship too.
For security purposes.
Any
yeah.
issues with them turning valves and knobs
No.
as they were walking down P-ways?
Not to my knowledge. I'm
All
sure
right.
they might have. Hey, what's this thing do? I don't know what this thing. Some sailor will fix this. I don't know.
What was chow like on the carrier?
It wasn't so bad. I don't think so. You know, we
got a big mess deck though.
Yeah,
Huge
we
mess
had we
deck?
had two, I think.
Okay.
If I remember correctly, but they had soft ice cream, you know,
Oh.
and they
Fancy.
I thought it was okay. I mean,
Yeah.
I'd heard horror stories and I
Yeah,
thought,
yeah.
wait, I go to the gym twice a day and I get all the food I want. You know, I get a big old omelet and any time of day and this big salad and
Oh yeah.
you know. So when I had my cup, if I wanted something to drink, I'd go fill her up and bring
to
her
go.
back.
No
You know?
issues.
No.
Well, you got any? Whenever you think about your time in the Navy, you got any most memorable? You already talked about a couple things: shellback ceremony,
Mm-hmm.
watching that Russian aircraft fly by. Any other major sea stories that come to your mind when you're thinking about your time in the Navy?
No, just the last time pulling into Pearl, you know, as you passed the memorial there, that's always stuck with me.
Yeah.
And then coming back in to the mainland underneath the Golden Gate, where you really feel appreciated by the folks there.
Yeah.
I don't think they were family members because they were all going to be at the port when everybody pulled in.
Right.
So I think it was more locals that knew
Oh, yeah.
the carrier and the battle group was coming in actually. So
Yeah.
because some of the other ships were ahead of us coming in, and
Yeah.
a couple behind. So that was branded into your memory.
Yeah.
So that's cool.
Yeah. Definitely. And where'd you go after the Navy?
After the Navy, I started working for the McDonnell Douglas Corporation in St. Louis and got into management on the F-18 A's and B's, which is a fighter attack aircraft, and they were in the process of transitioning, or what did they call that? Sundowning, I think, the A-7s, that they were old Vietnam era aircraft, and the F-18 was the new. It was going to do
Replacing them.
both roles of for the F-14 and the A-7. They replaced the mission of that, where they could do fighter
Both with one platform.
Right.
Yeah.
So we got involved with I got in the management of the F-18s and really fell in love with that aircraft. And what was fantastic about that is it's a tailhook aircraft. I mean, it's for the Navy.
Yeah.
So I still had a Navy connection.
Yeah.
And heck, I did that for 18 years or so, and eventually McDonnell Douglas was bought by the Boeing company. Everybody thinks the Boeing company is commercial,
Yeah.
but half of their business is United States defense. So they put a lot of money into maintaining that and did the right things to keep that aircraft alive, which they're still building it in different models. And I moved on to that's new production.
Yeah.
Then I moved on to into Jacksonville, Florida. We did mods and upgrades to the airframe itself because the technology is always increasing from an avionics standpoint. So we would upgrade the aircraft that way. Then I went to San Antonio, Texas, and that was the end of my Navy activity. Got involved with the Air Force C-17s and the KC-135, and then the Air Force executive fleet that they fly out of Andrews, and that was the highlight of my career with the Boeing company, is working on the modified 737, 757, 747. So that was
How was that
cool.
transition? You know, going from the Navy style fighter craft to the more Air Force style frames.
It's really seamless. I mean,
Yeah.
you're still doing absolutely the best you can because you want to give the warfighter out there the absolute best they can have when
Right.
they're doing their mission.
Yeah.
So we supported the guys doing the actual mission and business of the United States Department of Defense. So
Yeah.
we were just doing everything we could to keep those aircraft back to them
Yeah.
as soon as we could.
And whenever you were working on the Navy style fighter craft, you know, did you ever go on to aircraft carriers at that time for testing or field trials, whatever they call them?
No.
You were more kind of ahead of that line?
Yeah. You know, one time I did get to go to Pax River, which is a Navy Air Station, and we got to meet the guys there that were doing testing for avionic upgrades and getting some feedback from them. And it was all, you had to go through contracts, obviously. You just couldn't get the user to say, hey, I want this. But you get an idea of what they're looking for. So it was an engineering team that I was leading at that time that they got the idea of what they needed to start working on from a capability standpoint. So once everything, the contracts were set, they're ready to go.
Yeah. Good to go. Any, obviously, a lot of moving pieces in that realm, the contracting side where you're developing these aircraft for the warfighter, right, for the Department of Defense. Any leadership lessons learned or management style lessons learned from like big takeaways from? So obviously there's probably a lot.
So coming out of the Navy, I worked for some. They were hard asses.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
So that was the style I developed.
Yeah.
You know, and taking it into McDonnell Douglas, that's what they were about too, because McDonnell Douglas was a defense contractor. They didn't do so much commercial, just a little bit.
Right.
And that was acceptable. Then Boeing came around and, well, we need to be softer, gentler. And then you start learning about servant leadership, you know, and that was a good style to change into. So
was it hard to make that transition from the old school hard ass to the servant leader?
No. Because I think if you care about your team and you want to be the best leader, you will adapt as well as asking them to adapt too. So it's never real rigid. You got to adapt as you grow. So
yeah, good to go, man.
Yeah,
awesome. All right, Mr. Harry, Mike. He goes by Harry or Mike. Tell us about how you joined the Navy. What was your experience leading up to getting you on that dotted line?
All right. Before I share my story, I'd like to pop a jock here. Say thank you.
Thank you, Jocko.
I'd also like to, just real quick, just as a review, to the two skimmers on my left, remind them that in the Navy, there are two types of ships. There are submarines and there are targets. Okay, now that we have that settled.
So obviously you were on the submarine service, the silent service.
I was on the, in the submarine force.
Before we get there, what made you join the Navy? Why'd you decide to go Navy?
A lot of things kind of led up to my decision to join the Navy. After high school, I tried college briefly for maybe 6 months. My parents were not able to afford to pay for my college, so I took out a student loan. And within that 6-month period, the first 6-month period of my college life, I had completely depleted all of my student loan funding on everything except things that were actually related to my education. So I learned a lesson, during that time period. And at the time, I think that was 1980. The economy had not been doing very well. Jimmy Carter, I believe, was just leaving office. And I don't know if you know anything about the historical time that was the things that were taking place at that time in our country, but Iran had just taken hostages, U.S. hostages from the embassy. And there was a plan, I guess, a task force that was sent over to try to extract them, and it was a complete failure and an embarrassment. So a lot of that was going on at that time. And after college, I had a friend who had a brother and a sister that lived in Dallas, Texas. And he told me, he kind of exaggerated, I guess, that the construction industry in Dallas, Texas was booming. And we could make big money. And we could go live with his brother and make a killing. So that was my plan. He invited me, and I packed a bag. We took off to Dallas. I was making a whopping $5 an hour picking up trash for this construction company. And one thing led to another. I could probably go on for about 2 hours and really, with a lot of detail, describe what type of life I was living in Dallas. It was not pretty. I lived in basically an apartment where the cockroaches were so heavily infested that you could hear them crawling across the kitchen counters at night.
You know,
And-
cockroach poop is actually a common allergy.
Oh, well, that may be part of my problem right now.
Maybe you developed a cockroach
Sure, I
allergy
inhaled.
at
Hey,
that point in time.
so the other thing about cockroaches is you could feel them actually crawling across your skin at night. That's how heavily infested my apartment was. And of course, when I came to my senses, I realized this is not a future for me. This is not the future I want. So I had learned that my brother had joined the Navy. I knew that my father had served in the Navy. And so I believe I talked to my brother on the phone a few times, and he said, join the Navy because they will provide you with a clean bed every night, 3 square meals a day, free education. You can live on base, have all your housing paid for, and you'll see the world. If you
2 days
chose
in
to
the
do-
gym? Did he talk
And
about that?
No, we weren't really. No, he didn't tell me anything about the gym
He was keeping that to
at that
himself.
time. But he did give me some
Short
great
line. I want a
advice.
short line.
Some of the greatest advice he gave me was, if you will just keep your mouth shut and do what they tell you, you'll be fine. And I'm so glad that he gave me that advice, because I have some stories about some folks that outranked me, that just put me through the coal, raked me over the coals. And I remembered, just keep your mouth shut, do what they tell you, and you'll be fine.
You remember giving him that advice?
I do not.
You know, no memory of
I
that
appreciate
recollection.
it. I remember that.
So that's what got you going. So once you joined, where'd you go to boot camp?
So before I made I had moved back home with my parents for 2 weeks, and I knew I was going to join the Navy. But then I thought, okay, if I join the Navy, do I want to fly? Do I want to be in aviation? Do I want to be on a ship, etc.? And so I did some research at the public library.
No
And-
internet back then.
No internet. No. You had to break
No
the books
smartphones?
open. No smartphones.
No phones?
You had to break it open and do it the hard way. So I did some research, and I tried to find out what were the technologies or industries that were going to be in high demand over the next 20 to 30 years in the future. So one of the things that caught my eye was computers, information technology, and telecommunications. So I went to my recruiter, took the ASVAB test, scored very high on the ASVAB test, and he sent me to a place called MEPS. I don't know if you know what MEPS is.
What's MEPS?
But
for the
MEPS
listener?
MEPS is the next step above your recruiter. They send you to a regional office, and you talk to. They're also full of recruiters at this MEPS station, but they help you figure out, okay, what type of job do you really want to do, and what's the obligation going to be from you?
Well, they're doing further testing on you too, right?
They were.
They're testing you
Yeah,
mentally, physically,
they were.
emotionally.
I did a full physical.
Nice.
They did a full physical on me.
Oh yeah. They're doing the physical
with
on
everything.
you. Yeah. Oh
I'm
yeah.
talking everything.
Oh yeah.
You know what I'm talking about? Woo! Yeah. So,
Part of the process.
At my time in that life, I'd never had any of that. I'd never been subjected to any of that type of testing. So anyway,
Well, Uncle Sam owns you. Did he own you at that point?
I had
you
not signed the
signed?
documents
Oh.
yet. No. But they presented me with a package, and one of the packages was nuclear power, and one of the packages was a submarine radioman with a 6-year obligation. In my first 2 years, I would have technical training for 2 years, and that would entail, of course, boot camp, radioman A school, basic electronics and electricity, submarine school in Groton, Connecticut, and advanced training in electronics and electricity for the equipment that I would be working on. So that would provide me with the equivalent of a 2-year college degree.
But they actually did that in 2 years, or they gave it to you in about a year, and they said, "All right, here we go. You're going to the fleet."
Well, it was a little at the time. I didn't realize I could kind of regulate my time through those classes and be okay. I was just put my nose to the grindstone and did it as fast as I could. So anyway, came back and told my recruiter, my local recruiter, that I was going to sign up for 6 years as a submarine radioman. And he said, "Well, why didn't you choose to go with the nuclear plan?" And I said, "Well, I was honest on my application. And when they asked me if I had smoked some wacky weed at any time in my life, I told them yes, because I was just being honest." So they said, "Well, then you are no longer eligible for this nuclear package. You're going to have to go over here." Although I think I have a higher clearance doing what I did with everything that I had that I had access to.
Yeah,
I had access to a lot of classified information. That's part of my job.
So then they shipped you off to boot camp. Where was that at for you?
Well, so that's interesting because, I was in Illinois, and I thought they were going to send me to Chicago, which I did not want. But I guess I had scored such a good score on my ASVAB test that the recruiter said, "You can go to Orlando, Chicago, or sunny San Diego, California."
They gave you the choice?
They gave me the choice.
Have we heard of this before? Have we ever heard of someone getting a choice where you go?
It took me, I'm not exaggerating, it took me half a second. I said, "California." And he said, "Okay, 2 weeks, you're going to California." Okay.
There you go.
So 2
you
weeks
went to paradise, Southern California.
Woo! 2 weeks later, at night, I think it was about 11 p.m., I arrived. Was it TWA? Do you remember TWA?
Yeah.
Do you remember that? Okay, that was an airline back then. Popular airline. What was it? Transworld Airline. TWA, flight to San Diego out of St. Louis. Arrived at 11:30. They huddled probably me and 100 and some odd guys, all with hair flowing over our shoulders, in this room, and started barking. And 2 hours later, we found ourselves in an open bay with a bunch of beds. I'd never experienced that before, and I thought, okay, we're going to get some sleep. Yeah, I think you alluded to something about trash cans, and yeah, so they came in.
You had the same experience.
I had the same experience, only I was in California. So they woke us up, 2 hours later, and then everything broke loose. Get rid of your clothes, cutting your hair, and so it began.
Squaring your meals.
Yes.
Polishing your boots.
Standing at attention.
What were you wearing back then? Dungarees? Was it dungarees?
Dungarees. Yeah. And for some reason, I was selected as what they call the guidon. You know what a guidon is? Guy with the flag for the company. Yeah. I don't know. I had the stride. They're looking at your the length of your stride, because the guys behind me in our formation, some of those guys were 6'6". Well, they did that to regulate their stride, right? You know how that works. So,
so what was that like? They handed you the guidon. You said you got to carry this everywhere you go.
Absolutely.
Do not let this out of your sight.
Do not let it touch the ground. You are responsible for this guidon.
Even when you're sleeping.
Yes. What I slept with it in my bed.
He was hugging it.
That's right. There was a certain amount of time where they changed it out and everybody was carrying a rifle. Right. We had to learn how to do the rifle drills. Yeah. So.
What kind of rifle were you guys carrying back then for your drill?
It was heavy.
M14 or
M1, I think.
M1.
Yeah. I don't remember exactly. Don't quote me on that.
Yeah.
So.
So what was any big memories from boot camp?
Yeah.
Good or bad?
Oh yeah. So my first night on watch. So when you're in the barracks and everybody's sleeping, there's a fire watch, and your job is to roam the whole barracks and safeguard your company, right?
From the drill instructors.
Yeah. So quite an experience, because a lot of people, believe it or not, talk in their sleep. And a lot of people develop, is this a G or an R-rated
It's an E-rated, explicit.
Okay. A lot of things rise in the evening in a male barracks. You know, there was a rumor going around that they put saltpeter in the food in the barracks, but you know, I don't know if that was true or not, because
Getting you guys amped up.
I guess, I don't know. So there were a few sleepwalkers that I experienced.
And you had to wrestle them back to their bed?
That's right, trying to get out the door, or at least tried to make me believe that they were
I was
sleepwalking.
about to say, were they actually sleepwalking, or are they just going out the door?
Yeah. And then as time went on, as our boot camp, I think it was 8 weeks at that time. So like by the 6th and 7th week, you know, you got a little bit more lax. And the G-Dunk machines were downstairs.
What's a G-Dunk machine?
Well, G-Dunk is snacks. So like when you're out polishing your brass, your belt buckle, and your shoes all together, that was part of our training, was shining our brass. You found out where the G-Dunk machines were located. So if a couple of guys happened to be sleepwalking at night and happened to go out, slip out the door when the fire watch is on the other end of the barracks, and you know you caught them coming in, well, that's, hey, you're coming in here, I'm on watch. Give me some of that. I need some G-Dunk.
Yeah.
You know.
Yep.
So yeah, that was very memorable. I do remember also one time. So everything that you clean, when you clean the floors in boot camp, you do it with your hands. We're taught your hands, the palm of your hands, are the best cleaning agent that there is.
There you go.
So our responsibility, everybody had a responsibility. Underneath your rack was the floor, and part of your morning evolution was to take your hand and crawl underneath your rack and clean the whole floor with your hands and your belly. And so
right before uniform inspection.
I tested that once. One time, to see if anybody really was inspecting. Well, I didn't know this, but after we all had to fall out in formation, the CO would have somebody come back with a clean white towel and crawl throughout the whole barracks and go under every rack. Guess who got caught? Me.
Singer.
Yeah.
Yep.
And got called out in front of everybody. Drop. And, you know, this far away from my face is my commanding officer's mouth spitting in my face.
Nice.
Yeah. And he was not very nice. No, he was not nice. But I only did it once.
He said you thought you came to sunny San Diego?
You didn't think we were going to
be on vacation?
That's right. That's right. Who do you think you are? Yeah. Yeah. So, yeah. And I was single. I had no responsibilities. And I did not have any problem with the PT portion of that. Most of it was psychological, as you know. Yeah.
So after boot camp, you went to a number of other schools. Talk to us about sub school real quick, as much as you can.
Okay.
We know the submarine community is very close.
That's right.
Very tight.
Right after boot camp, I went to Radio and A school, which was just a hop and a skip across the bridge at Liberty Station. Yeah. So I went to Radio and A school. I went to basic electronics training right there. And once I completed those, I was sent to Groton, Connecticut for sub training.
So you were still hanging out in sunny San Diego for a while?
I was, and I loved it because it was summertime and the beach was fine. Yeah, I loved it.
What was your favorite beach at that time?
The one that had the water. The water.
All right.
Salt water.
So then you went to, where'd you go for sub school? Groton, Connecticut?
Groton, Connecticut.
So you left San Diego.
That's right.
Now you're going up to the cold climate. Northeast United States.
Yeah. So most of the time that I spent in San Diego, it was always in a open barracks type of arrangement. When I went to sub school, they changed it. You have 3 roommates, so you have 4 people to a room. Yeah, and so that was a little bit better.
So what was that? What was sub school like?
Sub school, you learned basic operations of how a submarine works, what the systems are, the hydraulic systems, electrical systems, saltwater systems, reactor, at a high level. how it dives, how the submarine dives, and the ballast tank operations, and the diesel generator, and what type of weapons and where the weapons are located. The propulsion systems at a high level, that kind of thing. We did go through some stressful testing. There was a simulator. It's called a flood simulator, and they would put you in a compartment with like a team, and you knew what was coming, right? They were going to simulate flooding in the engine room. So there's these big pipes that simulated the saltwater intakes, and when they pulled the switch, you're being flooded, and so you're in a casualty situation, and it's your job with your teammates to work together to stop the flooding, or you die.
So there's a pipe leaking, for example.
Multiple pipes multiple pipes at the same time leaking. Yeah. And some of them you can simply take the big valve and close it. But as soon as you get that isolated, something blows up here, and then something over here. So then they got to split the team up and put bandit straps on, and things of that nature. So that was both physical and psychological.
How was that for you? Because when you're on a submarine, obviously you're under the water.
Yeah.
You could be very deep underwater, right? And if something happens like that, now the submarine's taking on water.
That's right.
Legit, you might not come back up.
That's right.
Whereas if you're on a surface ship, you could just jump overboard if the ship's going down, right? In theory, right? You could still be on the surface.
Yeah.
Well, was that psychological factor weighing on you and your shipmates?
At sea? While at sea?
In training, because you guys aren't even on a sub yet.
Oh, yeah.
You're starting to think about these things?
Yeah, you start to think about those things. We had another test where they put us in a pressure chamber, and they simulate the different pressures on the human body at certain depths. So we would go into like a bubble. I think there were 8 men because of the restricted space, and a Navy diver, certified Navy diver. He was the one controlling the pressure. And so obviously if your ears popped, you could clear your ears and all that, you were good, and he would take us down to a certain depth and make sure everybody's ears could clear and everything was good. Then we'd take us down, from 200 feet to 600 feet and then to 1,000 feet. And we had one guy that I remember his, he couldn't do it. He couldn't clear his ears. His nose started to bleed. So we had to go back up, go through the whole process again.
Yeah.
So that's psychological as well.
Yeah.
And you knew it was serious business.
Yeah.
You're not there to play for that kind of thing.
What
So
are some of the effects you might experience at a lower pressure? You said nosebleed and such.
Nosebleed. If you could possibly burst an eardrum if you don't clear properly. Yeah.
Good to go. So after you finished all your schooling and you went to your sub and you reported for duty, right? Everyone remember when you first reported for duty? What was that like when you first walked up to your submarine? And I'm assuming there was an officer at the deck, right? In port, maybe. And you started getting on board. What was that like?
So before I went there, I had a little trouble after sub school when I went to my advanced training for electronics. There was a segment there that I didn't pick up very well. So I went to captain. I had to go to captain's mast, and he wanted to make sure that I was on board 100%, fully
100%
engaged,
committed.
Yeah, I failed the test. He was going to give me a second chance, so he put me back a week.
Yeah,
I went back through that. Was given mandatory night school, one night a week for 3 hours. I had to be in math class, and there was no final exam at the end of the training, but the instructor who I had at the time felt like there should be. So they started to put that process in place, and they gave us a sample final test, and I didn't do too well on that. Me and a couple other guys didn't do too well on that. But we still graduated. We're still going to the fleet.
Yeah.
He didn't like that. So he chewed me up and down in front of everybody. Told me I didn't deserve to go to the fleet. Told me I should be on a skimmer somewhere doing something else. Submarine Corps is for those that are
At a higher level.
At a higher level, yeah. So
He
anyway,
called your chief before you got there.
That's right.
Did he?
Must have.
Did
No,
he
I
really?
don't know. I don't know. I don't know. I was in training in Groton. All this training was in Groton, and I got sent. So what is it? Where they call you, and you get to select where your duty station is?
Ship selection or whatever they call it.
ship
Sub selection, whatever.
Yeah. So it was between me and another guy. It was a fast boat in Pearl or a boomer in Charleston. And I had some guys that were in my class had been deployed in the fleet, and they re-enlisted for this training courses. And they suggested, Singer, you need to go to Kings Bay and get on that schedule. Boomer was on a schedule, right? So I took that advice, ended up in Charleston.
Well, real quick for the listener, the difference between a boomer and a fast attack.
Yeah, so a boomer carries intercontinental ballistic missiles.
It's a large submarine that carries
submarine.
the nuclear missiles.
That's right.
Right.
That's right.
And then a fast attack is a smaller submarine that's primary mission is to seek and hunt. Correct.
Hunter killer.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, they chase boomer. They look for boomers, basically.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and the Soviets were doing the same thing.
Yeah.
Soviets had ballistic missile submarines and fast attack submarines.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So those were your options, and you
That's right.
you went the boomer route, right?
I did. Yeah.
And what happened?
So I arrived in Charleston. It was cold. I think it was December. It was probably 1 o'clock in the morning.
Was it cold, or coming from Connecticut, you're like, I like this?
Well, no, it was cold. It was cold
Was
in
it?
Charleston. I think the river had ice on it.
Oh, really?
Yeah. It was,
dang.
It was pretty cold.
What year was this?
This was 84, late 83, the winter of 83. Yeah. So I flew into Charleston. They picked me up. I was in uniform, dressed blue.
Ship's company
from
picked
what
you
I
up?
remember, yeah.
Yeah.
And they took me to I was in Charleston. Then they had to take me from Charleston down to Kings Bay because at the time the boomer Charleston
Fast attacks were at Charleston.
Well, there were some boomers in Charleston, but then they had a new base. Jimmy Carter was president in the late 70s. They wanted another nuclear ballistic missile submarine base, and I guess magically it appeared in Georgia.
There you go.
The president his home state was Georgia. I don't know how that works, but anyway.
Right down the road from Charleston.
That's right. I arrived in Kings Bay, Georgia, late at night, and my sea bag disappeared. I don't know where it went. Somebody grabbed it off this bus, and the next thing I knew, they were escorting me down to the submarine tender, and then from the tender, my boat was tied up next to the tender.
What's a submarine tender?
Submarine tender tenders the submarines.
Is it a ship?
It is a surface ship.
So it's a ship that's on the pier,
Yes.
and then the submarine doesn't actually come up to the pier; it comes up next to the tender.
Well,
in this case,
it can do either. Yeah.
Yeah.
But in this case, we were tied up next to the tender because they had just completed sea trials for the next deployment. So.
Yeah. So
Anyway.
someone carried your sea bag for you.
Somebody took it down below decks, and it disappeared.
What a nice shipmate.
Yeah, they were great.
So you got on your submarine?
There was a vacancy. They needed a submarine radioman. Okay, I came because I obligated for 6 years. I came out of my training classes after 2 years as a third class. So I'm wearing a stripe. And back then, during the Cold War, there was a big need for submarine radiomen. So I came aboard, and there was an open slot. They needed another person so they could have a 3-section rotation. So I did not have to hot rack. I did not work in the kitchen. A lot of people have to, be a mess cook and all that.
What do they call that? Remember?
Mess crank.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Temporary
That's a
duty
slang
or
for it.
something?
Yeah, but
TD?
Mess
basically, if you're on ship's company, I don't think detachments have to do it if you're embarked on a ship, but ship's company, whether you're a surface ship or submarine, there's special duties that have to be done on the ship to help take care of the whole ship.
That's right.
And one of those duties is working in the mess decks,
Mess crank.
right, where you're going to help out
Right.
the culinary specialists who are making the food, and you're basically picking up
Yeah.
trash,
Yeah.
serving food to the crew, basically doing anything a culinary specialist doesn't want to
Yeah.
do. You're doing it for them.
And we had a TDU, trash disposal unit. So we had a TDU operator. We also had a laundry queen, and I had the privilege of being part of the laundry queen team
Nice.
during my time on board.
Washing people's clothes, taking
Dirty
care of their
skivvies.
clothes.
You learn
Yep.
a lot about people's hygiene when you wash their laundry, let me tell you.
So you got some skid marks going on.
A few skiddies there. Yeah. Yep. The XO's got some skiddies, you know.
Well, there's also some benefits to being in these special duties because you get to become acquainted with some crew members you might normally not be acquainted with, which could benefit you in certain
That's true.
situations
That's true.
if you perform your duties appropriately.
Yeah. Yeah.
So you got on your submarine.
That's
you're
right.
starting to get accustomed to the ship's company.
Mhm.
What was kind of daily routine like on the submarine? In port, at least.
Well, in port was just basic, we were doing maintenance to get the sub ready for deployment again. We had 2 crews. We had a blue crew and a gold crew. So I was attached to the gold crew, and we rotated every 3 months. So when we would transit back to Charleston after a patrol, we would have 3 weeks, basically 3 weeks of just do what you want to do, check in with the cob once a week, and then training after that, which was typically for a radioman. It was Morse code, international Morse code training. We did a lot of that, and also some training for equipment we had on board. The sub, yeah, and things like firefighting training that you're always doing.
Every sailor is a
things like that.
firefighter.
That's right.
You got to save the ship.
Yep.
So did you do any patrols or anything once you got on board?
I did 8 strategic patrols during my time on board the sub for 4 years.
What were those like?
Well, there is a lot of people, you think of the Navy, you think, well, there's some submarines out there, but there's quite an extensive network under the sea of things that most people don't realize. And if you Google things like SOSUS, what is SOSUS, you'll find out there's a lot of things that are attached to the floor of the sea that are helping our Navy. Not only for our benefit, but also to keep an eye on the bad actors of the world, who also have submarines.
Yep.
And now, maybe not submarines that are fully manned, drones, robotics, a lot of that is coming forth with the new technology that's there now.
Yeah.
That the listener probably doesn't have any knowledge of unless they're specifically looking online for some of that information. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So
your patrols, were they, well, before we get to the patrols, what was kind of like your first experience diving, right? Because that's one of the things a submarine does, go underwater.
yeah,
Versus like an aircraft carrier, you're dealing with the flight deck, right? So
Right.
that's kind of the main experience of
yeah.
the aircraft.
When
or
you're
one of the
when
big
you're on a
ones.
submarine, you want to be underwater.
Right.
You want to be, because if you're in a sea state 3, 4, or 5, and you're in a submarine with no windows and you're rocking, yeah, you're probably puking. Most people, we're puking. We're puking. So
When you first dove, what was that feeling?
dive. Yeah, and then when you finally get underwater, it's just like this. It's quiet. There's not a lot of movement. You can feel some movement if if we go a little deeper or come up a little bit, for whatever reasons. Depends on what we're doing at the time. For some evolutions, we would need to come up closer to the surface. For others, we would need to dive down below the layers, different layers that are there. I think Doug was talking about, was it the bear? The bears. We would get a lot of intel about where the bears were located, and if there's a bear in our vicinity, we don't want to be close to the surface because they have. Well, back then, I don't know what it is now. Technology obviously has changed, but we knew that they had technology to see things. Let's just say. So we wanted to be deep to kind of elude some of those prying eyes.
Can you explain what a bear is? Because I don't think it's clarified for people who don't know.
The Soviets had Bears.
Bears and aircraft, right? Is it an anti-submarine aircraft
No,
or a
it's
surveillance aircraft?
A Bear was a long-range strategic bomber that had other avionic capabilities, but that's one of the primary missions. It was I don't know if it's still in existence, but it had, if I remember correctly, 4 or 6 prop engines on it.
Big boy.
Yeah, it was a big aircraft.
Carrying big payloads.
Similar to a B-52 in the U.S.
Okay.
Air Force fleet.
They primarily did the ocean.
Well, it's a long-range bomber, so it's going to transit over the ocean, correct? To possibly deliver a payload of explosives, high-level explosives, to a certain target.
If you're-
That'd be the
But I
main
mean,
mission.
from if your ship is has nuclear weapons on it, if you can take that one out,
Yeah.
it's less of a deterrent if
Well-
you want to make an initial strike. So
Well, also, if it's a long-range platform, that means it can transit a long period of time, which means they could have used them just to transit over the Atlantic Ocean, for example, and just look for submarines that possibly are close to the surface, and then pass that information to somebody else.
They would.
A Russian surface ship, a Russian submarine.
Yeah.
Because there's a lot of things in all of the militaries around the world, right? Submarines are a huge threat. So there's aircraft that are designed specifically to detect submarines, find submarines, right? Surface ships that have specific pieces of equipment on them to detect and find submarines. Like an aircraft carrier, for example, is going to carry aircraft that are anti-submarine specifically, and they will launch them just to check the area around the aircraft carrier to protect the aircraft carrier, in addition to the ships that travel with the aircraft carrier, like a destroyer, for example, that's also checking the water around it for submarines, or also the air for air contact. So it gets very complex when you're talking about naval warfare. It's super complex, more complex than the average person understands.
Right.
Right. But when we're talking specifically about submarines, if you're a submarine, you're thinking about, how do I defend myself from detection? Because the silent service, that's the nickname for the submarine service. It's all about not being detected, right? And slipping into an area, slipping out of an area, right?
Or hiding.
Or hiding.
If you know,
On standby.
if you know there's a bad actor who's even remotely close to where you may be operating or heading your way, you want to hide. And that was part of our mission, was to hide, because we had a payload on board that we were going to deliver if we were given the order, and we did not want to be found.
So your patrol, in general, you would go out, you would operate in an area. If you got orders to deliver a payload, you were ready to do that. Then at the end of that patrol, you would basically transit back to wherever your home base.
Well,
for
unfortunately,
example.
if we had to deliver our payload, I don't think we would be coming back to,
Right,
to
right.
anything.
But
there'd
if
be
you-
nothing to come back to.
if you didn't deliver your payload, which you didn't have to, thankfully, right? So if you didn't have to do that at the end of your patrol, you'd basically leave that area that you were in standby, and you would transit back to your home base. Correct.
Right. That's right. Unless we had a medevac or a humevac that had to be performed, which we did on occasion. Yeah.
What happened in that situation?
Well,
Do you know where you were at in the world?
I did. Yeah. Somewhere in this big area called the Atlantic Ocean.
So what happened?
We did not need to go sit off the coast of northern Russia to hit our targets. So, well, we had one. I won't mention any names, but one of the officers on board had a severe case of the hemorrhoids. So severe that our corpsman had to operate
Dang.
on him. And
On the sub.
Yeah. So when you're on a sub, the operating table is in the officers' quarters, the officers'
Wardroom,
wardroom.
where the officers eat their dinner.
That's right, on their
And their
dinner
breakfast.
table. That's right. And that's where they perform the operation. Yeah. So the officer did survive the surgery, but unfortunately there were some complications, and we had to get him off. We also had another time I remember somebody had suffered from an appendectomy, and you know how that is. You
Good
don't want to mess
Lord.
around with that. So yeah,
You guys came to the surface and a helicopter arrived?
That's-
Or how-
that's correct.
Is that how you did it?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
That Corman was punished for that, wasn't he?
The corpsman, I don't.
Doing the appendectomy
doing-
without a license.
No,
Oh,
well,
really?
he didn't actually perform the appendectomy. The person on board was diagnosed with appendicitis.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Dang.
So yeah, I don't think he could perform an unless it was an emergency.
It's hard.
Maybe.
Well,
Sometimes when
he was in contact with medical
They were.
medical personnel.
Yeah. You didn't like to break. We didn't like to transmit any type of electronic signal, but in that case, if it's an emergency like that, the commanding officer would make a decision. And we had some burst transmissions that we could contact, the squadron commander
yeah.
and all that. Yeah.
Submarine operations very complex, but sometimes you got to make decisions with the best interest of your crew
Yeah.
in mind, right? Especially if you're the corpsman, there's probably one corpsman on the submarine, maybe a corpsman and an assistant,
One.
maybe,
Yeah. We had one.
right? And so you got to make decisions, especially if you're very deep underwater and
right.
places where you can't transmit, right?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
what are some of your most memorable sea stories from time serving on the submarine?
Well, one of the most memorable that you try to forget something like this, but when you're the newbie and you're a non-qual, we haven't get into that yet. A non-qual newbie, and they have something called a halfway night ceremony, and there's no members of the opposite sex on board, then you got to have a show.
That's right.
So
Halfway night.
that's right. Halfway night, you got to have a show. You got to have some showgirls.
Yep.
You know what I'm saying?
Yep.
So every division had to produce a showgirl. So
There's also some other rumors of submarine service, which we don't have to get into those.
yeah, I don't know
they
about
have
those.
they have some special traditions.
I don't know about those.
Under
these
the
were
sea.
actually these were G-rated shows. G-rated. Okay.
Well, you mentioned non-qual. What's the difference? What does that mean?
So a non-qual is when you arrive to your submarine, fresh, never been there before. Part of what you have to do is qualify on the ship's systems, right? So I'm sure you have to do this on a surface ship too, where you go through a training regimen where you have to learn about all the different systems on board the submarine, which can be rather lengthy because you have to learn them in detail.
So what's the quick and easy process on becoming qualified? What kind of things do you have to do to get qualified?
Well, you look at schematics that are made available on board. You study the hydraulic systems, the portable water systems, the electrical systems, just every system you can think of. The TDU I spoke about. How do the bathrooms work? How do we flush?
So you study these
what type
things
of
and then you're
tanks are
tested
there.
on it?
Yeah, and
Are you tested written tests, verbal tests, all the above?
Both, yeah. And then at the end, you sit before a board. You sit in front of a board, and then once you pass that board, you're qualified. So, and once you're qualified, you are able to wear the submarine insignia on your uniform,
Which is known as the Dolphins,
which is known as the Dolphins.
right?
But what they don't tell you is, once you receive your Dolphins, it is the crew's responsibility to make sure that those are tacked on your chest.
This is probably an older school tradition. They may or may not do this anymore.
And mine were tacked. Mine were tacked on.
Sure, you got some big boys on the submarine too, waiting to tack them on.
Big old boys. those torpedo men. Yeah, I mean they gotta be able to heft those heavy torpedoes around the torpedo room, and they're looking to get rid of some of their frustrations because those torpedoes don't bend. You know what I'm saying?
Or maybe they weren't able to get a transmission out, and they're like, "Singer's a radio man."
They didn't get a good family-gram. That's right. Yeah.
Did you guys go through any similar qualification experience?
Yeah.
You got
did?
qualified,
You got
Uncle Doug?
tacked?
Yeah. You get another
tacked?
one. You get promoted. You get it tacked on. Yeah.
Yeah.
Was your qualification through your air wing, or was it through the
No.
ship?
Through our squadron.
Through the squadron.
Yeah.
Gotcha. Good to go. So you got qualified. Now you've got your insignia on your uniform.
That's right.
You're performing your your daily responsibilities, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
Uncle Doug talked about gym on the aircraft carrier. Anything like that on a submarine?
There
or you're
was.
just lifting torpedoes?
So the missile compartment has 3 levels. Lower level missile is where we stored a lot of their food, a lot of our coffee and dry food. It's also an area where some of the junior people on board sleep, and the lights are always on down there. So, but in the front part of the lower level missile, we did have a makeshift weight area. Just a few weights, maybe a stair climber, from what I can remember, and a stationary bike, and a pull-up bar kind of thing. We had all that rigged up down there. So, yeah, if you wanted to work out, you could do that. Yeah. And you've probably seen the movies. What was the movie where the guy was running around the missile compartment? Was it Denzel Washington? What was that movie he was in with George Hackman? Crimson Tide, or The Hunt for Red October?
Hunt for Red October.
Or some of these guys were running. Yeah. So
very good.
That's basically what you can do to work out.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
good to go. So any other sea stories you want to mention? Things that you remember? Places you went?
Places we went. We did pull into Port Canaveral a few times. There's a torpedo range down south of the Bahamas. I don't remember.
So you guys would go train and then you'd pull into port?
We would do a lot of training down that way, in that area. And anytime you do that, there's a special team that comes on board with all their equipment for calibrations and testing. And so when a team comes on board like that, generally what they'll do is they'll ask part of the crew to go off and give you some shore duty or some shore time, some
vacation,
R&R. Yeah,
R&R on off the books.
That's right.
There you go.
So yeah, Fort Lauderdale, Caribbean. We did pull into Bermuda once. We were extended on one patrol because there was another sub that had some maintenance issues, equipment issues. We were extended for 2 weeks, and part of our reward was we were pulling into Bermuda for 4 days. So
now there is a very important question we have to address.
Yes.
Are you a slimy wog, or did you get initiated into the shellback?
A lot of the things that took place on board that's in the silent service, we call it, has to remain silent. Classified. So,
well, classification as a WOG or a shellback, that's big Navy. That's not just silent service. Are you able to answer the question?
I can tell you this. There's a large area of water called the Atlantic Ocean, and that's where we primarily conducted our operations.
You can neither confirm nor deny, huh?
All right, understood.
Yeah.
All right, so what happened after? So, any other major events while you were in the service? Big things that are in your mind.
Yeah, I had 2 patrols.
Upon?
I had 2 patrols remaining on my original contract, and I met a young lady. So there was another guy on my sub that I worked with. His girlfriend worked with another girl, and they had been trying to get us hooked up for a while. And
you spent a lot of time at sea with this guy.
Yeah,
you guys were close.
Yeah, we stood watch.
Okay,
together, quite a bit of watch together. Anyway, so I took the step and I called this young lady out of the blue, asked her out on a blind date. She said yes. So we hit it off, and we ended up getting married. So I did 2 patrols, and we dated, and I decided to exit the Navy, and we got married. So.
And then what happened after you got out of the Navy? Where'd you go from there?
When I got out of the Navy, I went to work. So this was before we had cell phones, before Apple, I think, was even a company.
What year was this that you got out?
This was 1988. And the technology at the time was a little thing called a pager. or if you know what a pager is. You'd
I've
wear
heard
it on
about
your,
it.
I don't know.
You'd
I've
wear
heard
it on
about
your
it.
belt, and if someone
I've seen it
needed
in
to
some old
contact
movies.
you, they would call this number and leave their number, and the system would transmit to your pager a 10-digit number where you would call them back.
Mm.
That was a pager. And the other thing at the time, a lot of commercial businesses used was called a two-way radio. A lot of public safety and public service agencies were also using pagers and two-way radios at the time. And there was a company in Charleston that just so happened that they needed a technician. And so I applied for that position. I got the position. And, yeah.
Went from there.
Went from there, and then from there I went to work. I stayed there for about 4 years. Then I went to work for a power company here in town. I worked on all their communications equipment and network. And I think it was about 1997 or 1998 when the cell industry began to take off. And so all the cell companies that were starting to build out their network, they were looking for qualified and experienced people, and I met those qualifications, and they offered me a job. And I'm still in that industry today. Yeah.
So you took your training from the Navy and continued down that path.
I did.
Similar to Uncle Doug.
Yep.
Same thing.
Yep. I'm so thankful for the technical education that the Navy has provided for me, and I'm glad I made that decision. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Good
Yep.
to go.
served me well. It has served me well. Yeah.
Well, you guys did some amazing things in the Navy, right? Had some great experiences. Any other thoughts amongst the group here after you've listened to each other's stories? Any other thoughts amongst the group about what each other did or things that you guys experienced? Obviously, different things, right? Grandpa, aka Lenny, right?
I was only in, I was in from 1942 to 46.
Mm-hmm.
That was during World War II.
Yeah.
And as I said, I went in as a hospital apprentice, dental second class.
Mm-hmm.
And my 2 years at Great Lakes, I think I was promoted to petty officer third class. And then as I got to, left Great Lakes, all of my promotions were in excess of requirement.
Mm.
So I didn't take any schooling or any testing to get my promotions.
Yeah.
I'm not proud of that, but I like the money.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. And everyone. Well, I don't think you've been to Hawaii.
I have
in
not.
the Navy
I've not been to Hawaii.
in general,
In general,
in
before,
or out of the Navy.
I have not been to Hawaii.
Period.
Been to California multiple times.
Yeah.
Never made it out to Hawaii.
I know.
Yeah.
Lenny and Doug both were in Hawaii in the service. Had a good time.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone hit up California at some point in the service. Had a good time.
I did hit Tijuana up.
You hit Tijuana. That was before the ban.
That's right.
Back in the
San
day.
Diego.
Yeah.
Little
Hop
and
on
a
across
skip.
the border real quick.
Yeah. Yeah.
Awesome.
I will say one thing to your listener,
Mhm.
if you want to hear this, if there's anybody out there that, if you have young listeners that don't really know what they want to do with their life, the Navy provides outstanding technical education. They have a wide variety of occupations you can choose from, and if you just don't know what you want to do, and you feel like you don't want to spend the money to go to college if you're undecided, then I would recommend looking into the Navy, especially in some of the technical fields
Mm-hmm.
But
that
they
are
have
coming
to
from the
be
future.
able to accept the discipline.
Mm.
That's part of it. Yes,
Yeah.
it is.
That's true.
Yeah.
Good to go. Yeah. All right. Well, any closing thoughts from anybody? No? Good to go. Well, thank you guys for your service. Thank you for giving up those times of your life, to our country, doing things that sometimes were a lot of fun, sometimes, wasn't so much fun, getting up for duty, right? Or dealing with some of the things that you dealt with You know, Grandpa mentioned the smell of burning flesh. Obviously, those things never leave your memory, right? You've experienced good leadership, bad leadership, right? And then you've carried those experiences through the rest of your lives, and you're still, right? We're all learning and adapting as we go forward based on our experiences. So, but thank you guys for your service. Thank you guys for what you've done. And thank you for sharing your story today. And to the listener, thank you for tuning in today. Hopefully you got some value out of these stories. If you guys have stories, if you have veterans, right, that have been through service, or those that have worked with veterans, or, you know, worked with the Department of Defense and the protecting the freedoms and liberties of our country, you know, send those to me. We love to sit down and talk to veterans and get their stories. We've done several up to this point, but it's always good to hear these stories and get them out for other people to experience and listen to as well. And if you guys want to support the podcast, go to the show notes, click on our link to our Good to Go shirt on Amazon. You can get it on Amazon. You get that shirt, you're going to support the podcast, and you're going to be good to go. So we appreciate you guys tuning in, and until next time, out.